You know, we had a huge storm in Florida, so my dad lives in Tampa. He said he's doing fine, but they lost power, as I'm sure millions of people did. So if you're in Florida, you're probably not on the call, but hopefully we're all doing okay. I'm doing the call today. Mike's out of the office, but he is taking calls tomorrow, so if you have questions, everybody's here to help you, and Mike will be back tomorrow taking questions. Today's call is a little bit of a hodgepodge, so we're going to cover several topics today, but as always, I want to start with the 5Q 5-minute moneymaker that you guys get every Wednesday. And so this week what we talked about is how would they describe you? I like this question number 2. Number 1, what do you think my 2 biggest strengths and my 2 biggest areas that need improvement are? But number 2, I like this one. Describe me in 5 words. How would your clients describe you? Number 3, if you were my boss, what is the one thing that could derail my career? And 4, if I wanted to improve just one thing, what thing do you think I should work on? We want to know what people are thinking of us, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to improve and get better. So that was the 5-minute moneymaker. You also get the 5Q breakdown, and in this one, we talked a little bit about turnover and making sure that we're getting the motive. Again, don't just listen to these. This is only about a 5-minute recording, but spend 10, 15 minutes really thinking about, if that were me in that situation, how would I have handled it, and what can I take from this and learn how to handle it better. So spend some time with these, because when you've mastered the crib notes and the motive, when you're doing your daily 15-minute practice and you're working on your GOTS, when you're really paying attention to the 5-minute moneymakers and breakdowns, that's when you'll bring on every client that you want, and that's the goal, because marketing gets tougher and tougher every year. We start to see people that are more and more skeptical, that are more inclined to do things themselves. And so if we want to bring on those people, we have to be good at these skills. So we want to make sure that we're working on that. To start off the call, I want to kind of play a little game, and you guys don't have to answer these things. You don't have to type in the answers in the question box, which again, because I don't do these calls that often, I don't pay attention to the question box probably as much as I should, or as much as Mike does. So if you do type in a question and I don't answer it, it's not because I'm ignoring you. It's probably that I just didn't see your question, so don't be offended. But one of these things is not like the other. I want to kind of ask you guys, are these things the same or different? And if you could, on the first one, just type in some answers in the question bar so that I can see that people are getting this. So let me show you something. This is a diversification chart, or a correlation matrix from Morningstar. So the 2 companies we're looking at, Apple and Ford, the same or different? Yeah, okay, people are answering, so that's great. Yeah, they're a lot different. Apple's a tech company. Ford's a manufacturing auto manufacturer. So we would expect that those 2 companies would be different. And in fact, when you look at the diversification chart there, you see that, yeah, they're only moderately correlated. They're only somewhat alike. They're not a lot alike. Let's do another one here. How about Alphabet, which is Google, and Honda? The same or different? Yep, different. Yeah, these are different companies, much in the same way that Apple and Ford are different. Google and Honda are very different. So here's where it gets a little bit tricky. What would you say about Apple, Google, and Microsoft? The same or different? The same. Yeah, we would think that. But when you look, they're very different. Apple, Google, Microsoft, I mean, it almost looks like this isn't any different than when we were comparing Apple and Ford, or Google and Honda. They look very different. They look very well diversified, and yet our intuition and our experience tells us that if the market were to go down, what would happen? Would these be diversified? Would we expect that they would maybe some would go down, maybe Apple would do good and Microsoft would do bad, or they would all go down. Yeah, we would expect that they would all go down, and yet that's not what the correlation is telling us. Let's look at one more. Let's look at Ford, Honda, and Toyota. I mean, we would expect that they're all car manufacturers, that they would be very much the same. And yet when we look at the diversification chart, it's telling us that everything is different. These companies are not the same at all, that they're all very different. If we put them all together, we look at Google and Apple and Ford and Honda, we find out that, wow, what a diversified portfolio. Because that's really what the argument is, well, we wouldn't just have Ford. We wouldn't just have Honda and Ford and Toyota. We would diversify it across asset classes. We would have some auto manufacturing, we would have some tech, we would have some retail, and we'd be diversified across asset classes. That's how we're going to get diversification. But what we find is there is no diversification, or really what I should say is everything is diversified. So what's going on there? Why is it that, sure, just like we would expect, Apple and Ford, they're very different. Google and Honda, they're very different, and yet it's telling us that Apple and Microsoft and Google are very different. That doesn't seem right. It's telling us that Honda, Toyota, and Ford are all very different. That doesn't seem right. We're being fooled into thinking that our portfolio is diversified, and why? Why does that happen? Well, prominent economists and people that study these things, academics, are saying, you know what? Diversification across asset class doesn't really work. See, the problem is diversification, the way it's calculated is it takes volatility into its equation. Volatility is part of the equation, and when we have a market that's been doing nothing but steady up over the last 8 or 9 years, there's very low volatility, which means everything looks diversified. Everything looks diversified. Now somebody's pointing out this is a 3-year time frame. If you look back 5 years, it looks even more diversified. Now why would that be? Has it been more or less volatile over the last 5 years as opposed to the last 3? Less. So it doesn't look more diversified over time. If you were to go back 10 years, it might not look quite as diversified because we had some real volatility in the front end in the first 3 years of that 10-year time period. But if all you're going to do is look at a time frame, if you're not going to go back any more than 9 years, it's all going to look diversified, according to these academics. So everything goes down because what happens in down markets? More or less volatility. More. Because there's more volatility, everything's going to start to look the same, which means they're all going to go down. Now, here's my point. My point isn't that your clients aren't diversified, that if you're thinking that you're going to diversify people across asset classes, or you're working with a money manager that's going to diversify people across asset classes, my point is not that, wow, that's probably not going to work. Now, I happen to believe that that's probably not going to work, but the truth of the matter is this is still up for debate. There's a lot of people who think that the way we calculate diversification is really flawed, and diversifying across asset classes is going to get you in a lot of trouble if that's what you're banking on. But there are quite a few people who say, well, I don't agree with some of their premises. I get why they say that, but I'm not sure I agree with all of their starting premises. My point is this, if you're on the call, here's my point. When you look at something like this, there should only be two possible thoughts running through your mind. Either you're thinking, you know what, I agree. You shouldn't be diversifying across asset classes. That's not going to work. And if you thought that, there are some other things that are out there that that are intended to kind of diversify and hedge your portfolio that don't rely on diversification across asset classes. So that's one thing you could be thinking, which is, you know what, I've been thinking this for a long time too. I believe this. That's why I'm doing A or B with my clients instead of diversification across asset classes. That's why I work with money managers who take that into consideration. That could be one thing running through your head. The other thing that could be running through your head is, well, I understand the arguments, but I'm not sure I agree with those arguments. See, the only thing that would be a problem, either one of those two things would be fine to think. The only thing that would be a problem, the only kind of thinking that would be a problem is if you're thinking to yourself, wow, I've never heard that before. Well, where is that coming from? See, there's an ad on TV. I can't remember even what it's advertising. But the catchphrase of the ad is, my dad says, be anything you want. Just be the best at it. And I love that saying. I have an 8-year-old son. That's what I tell him. Be anything that you want. All I ask is that you be the best at it. And so my question is, when people think of you, what do they think? Do they think, wow, that guy is, I don't know if I agree with him. I don't know if I'm going to work with him, but that guy knows a lot. That guy, when it comes to investing and finance, he's on the ball. If I were going to work with somebody, it would be somebody just like him. That guy is an expert. And so that's my question. Are we experts at what we do? I mean, most of us now, we're not in our early or mid-20s. We're not in our early 30s. There are a few of the people on the system that are maybe in that age range, but most of us are in our 40s and 50s, and so we have a breadth of experience and time that should make us an expert. Are we keeping up with the industry? Are we hearing about these things that are coming down the pipeline and putting them through our own filters and evaluating them, or are we just so out of it that we didn't even know that these are the things that are being talked about? I mean, I'll use myself as an example. My wife says, well, you know, you need to update your clothes, your fashion. I mean, you're a little bit behind. And I say, no, I'm not. And she says, well, come here, follow me. So she walks me over to the bedroom closet. She opens it up and she says, point to anything that's yours that you bought in the last 5 years. And I look at all my clothes and I stare at them for a couple minutes, and she walks away and says, I rest my case. My point exactly. Now, I guess I have to admit that she's right. I really haven't bought any clothes in a very long time. So I might not be up to speed on fashion, but that's okay. I don't care if people think that I'm fashion forward. It's okay for me. It's okay to me if people think that, he's not, he's fine, but he's not really that fashionable. But I wouldn't want people, if I'm managing their money, I wouldn't want them to think, he's fine, but he's not that investment savvy. I really should be an expert in this field. And so how do you know if you're an expert? Well, I always say, just take the book test. You should be able to point to 5 books on investing written in the last 10 years, so more or less current, that you've read in the last 5 years. And that's not a lot, guys. That's 1 book a year on investing. But I guarantee you, you should at least be in the habit of doing that. I don't want you spending all your time researching the industry. That's not really your job. Your job is to go out and see people and to be good when you're in front of people. So that's what I want you spending most of your time doing, getting out in front of people and being good at communicating when you're with them. But we need to be good at what we do. And I'll tell you, people can sense it when they're in the presence of somebody who really knows their stuff. They don't have to point to their degrees, and they don't have to point to all the books on their bookshelf. You just know when you talk to them that, wow, that guy knows his stuff. And so is that what people are saying about us? Are they saying, wow, that guy knows his stuff? If that's not what they're saying, I'm not saying if you haven't read 5 books in 5 years that are about investing, I'm not saying you shouldn't be in the industry. What I am saying, though, is like me, maybe I should go shopping for clothes. Maybe we should get out there, get caught up with the things. The industry is changing. We have to change with it. We have to know, even if we don't agree with different people's theories of diversification, we should at least know what they are and know why we agree or don't agree with them, so that we can put together and look for portfolios that kind of match our investment philosophy. If you can't explain your investment philosophy to your clients, then they can't explain it either. And if they can't explain it, the likelihood that they're going to change what they're doing is slim to none. So make sure that you're staying up and current with your field. I'm not saying spend all your time doing that. Spend your time being a good communicator. But 5 books in 5 years, that's not going to take a lot of your time. I'll tell you, if you read 15 minutes a night, you would get through 5 books in a year, much less 5 in 5 years. So let's at least be doing that. Next topic, 21-point checklist. You know, when I meet with people and I talk to people, this is very common, especially for people that are just coming on. They're trying to get good at the 21-point checklist. They've been told that they need to go and practice this 21-point checklist on people that they have in their book, whether they're clients or warm prospects, just to get some experience under their belt. But that doesn't mean that we want you just going through the motions. That doesn't mean that I want you just sitting in front of people and just doing the survivor's guide like you heard it on tape, doing the power of attorney like you heard it on tape, doing the medical power of attorney and electronically filing like you heard it on tape, because that's what you were told to do. I want you to do that. I want you to do it like it's done on the tape, but I don't want you to do it just because that's what you were told to do, for 2 reasons, really. When you're just going through the motions, I always say, if somebody invites me over to dinner, you know, they could, you know, spend a lot of time, you know, cooking a meal and coming up with a menu and you know, just making it the best that they can make it. Or they could just throw some chicken patties on the grill and put some barbecue sauce over the top. Now, either way, I'm fine with it. I don't care. I mean, I'm just going to have dinner and hang out. So I really don't care if they don't take the time and don't put in the effort to, you know, create this menu. Instead, they just put some chicken patties on the grill and slap some barbecue sauce on them. That's fine with me, but don't think that I won't notice. I mean, I know all you did was put some chicken breast down and put some sauce over the top and put it between 2 buns. It's okay, but I know. And your clients take your cue from you. So if you're sitting in front of somebody and you're just going through the motions, I guess that's okay. You're getting some experience, but don't think they don't know that you're just going through the motions. They know. And if you're just going through the motions, then guess what they're going to do? Go through the motions. Nothing's going to come of it. So don't expect anything to come of it. If all you're doing is going through the motions, don't expect anything to come of it. So don't just go through the motions for 2 reasons. 1, because they know. And if you're just going through the motions, well, that's all they're going to do too. But number 2, deliberate practice is really the only way to get better quickly. I always get this question, how can I get up to speed on this quick? Not just how can I learn it, but how can I learn it fast? Because I really want to meet people and start doing this. I want to start getting in front of do-it-yourselfers and tire kickers and plate lickers and closing them. So how do I do that fast? Deliberate practice. That's how you do it fast. You go in and you start with a purpose. You're not just going through the motions, you have a purpose. You sit down before people come into the office and you think to yourself, today, this is what I'm going to do. Now, the purpose can be different. It can change based on your experience and where you're at and the last meeting. So I'll give you an example. I could go into a meeting saying, well, today I'm just going to work on asking questions. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tape this, and I'm going to know I did a good job because when I listen to the tape, I should hear myself asking tons of questions. Okay, so that's one purpose. Maybe you graduate and you say, okay, well today I'm not just going to ask questions. Today I'm going to ask open-ended questions. That's my purpose today, open-ended questions. I'll know that this meeting was successful if I play back the tape and I'm just asking I can point to like all dozens of open-ended questions. That's how I know it's a success. Not necessarily trying to do everything, I'm just trying to ask open-ended questions. You might go in to a meeting saying, okay, today I'm going to work on really getting them to discover that their guy screwed them. Getting them to say, my guy screwed me. That's what I'm working on today. If you start with the purpose, if you start knowing if you begin with the end in mind, the chances that you're going to succeed and actually do that thing are way higher than if you just go in and you have no clue what you're doing. You're just going through the motions. If you're going through the motions, if you could only stumble on these things by accident. And given enough time and given enough meetings, you'll probably stumble on the right things eventually. But you didn't come on to learn it eventually. You came on to learn it as good as you could, as quick as you could. And so always start with the purpose. Even if you've been doing this a long time, you take 2 minutes before every meeting and you think to yourself, what's my goal? What am I trying to get out of this today? It's a disclosure meeting. What I'm trying to get out of it is I want them to tell me my guy screwed me. It's an implementation meeting. What I want them to get out of it is, what I want to be able to do is make it interactive. I want to make sure that this is their idea. But always start with some purpose. Starting with some purpose, any purpose, because we're not always going to have the same purpose to every meeting, is going to get you a lot farther, a lot faster than if you just went in and said, okay, today's an implementation meeting, starting a solution. Now really think about what it is you want to do with these people that you're about to sit down with and really burn it into your brain so that just by osmosis, the fact that you've done that, some of that's going to come out. And you're going to have more success than if you just went in haphazard and willy-nilly. So start with the purpose. Obviously, the ultimate purpose is to get them to say, my guy screwed me on purpose. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to think to myself, what is the purpose of this meeting that I'm about to have? That's the first thing that you should do. Now, hopefully prior to that, though, you've taken the time to organize and practice the 21 so that you're able to present it with confidence. So I want to talk a little bit about organize and practice. Organize means that when you send in the statements and you get the Morningstar reports back from me, that you're not just setting them off to the side. The biggest misconception, especially with people who are new, is that these Morningstar reports are somehow separate from the 21-point checklist. That we go through these 21 things and then we show them and talk about the Morningstar reports. There are people on the system, and I don't have a problem with this at all. This isn't a criticism, it's just a fact, that just want the Morningstar reports and they're not using the 21-point checklist. That's fine. That's fine. They're using the Morningstar reports separate from the 21-point checklist. But if you use them separate from the 21-point checklist, the only thing you can do with them is show them that their investments are bad. And guess what? When the Dow's at 22,000, guess what they're going to say when you try and communicate to them that their investments are bad? You don't know what you're talking about. We've made tons of money with these. Yeah, but look at all the risks that you're taking. Yeah, but you got to take some risks to make some money. But you could have done better just being in the market. I don't know. I don't know. Every time I look, my account is up. I mean, I get what you're saying. This all looks good, so let me think about it. Can I take this with me? Now, I've gotten off on a tangent a little bit. My point is, make sure that you're organizing your 21 ahead of time. Make sure that the risk-reward graph is behind the risk-reward topic in the proposal, that when you flip the page, you're looking at the graph. Now, they can be in the back, just so you know, but just know that, okay, when I get to this part, I'm going to take out that graph. However you organize it, make sure you're organized. Make sure you know that the risk-reward graph goes with the risk-reward topic. Make sure you know that the correlation or diversification graph goes with the diversification topic. Make sure you know that when you're going through the VA fees, that you're going to look at the individual Morningstars and highlight the insurance expense. Make sure you're organized. Make sure you know what comes up where. And then make sure that you've practiced it. Make sure you're really clear that you've gone through the tutorial and you've rehearsed it and you know exactly what you're supposed to say. So make sure you've organized it, because that's what makes you a professional. That's what gives people the impression that you're an expert. And make sure that you've practiced it, that you know what to say, and that you've also, part of practicing is that you've rehearsed all the contingencies. Meaning, if I have somebody who has all but one account in their trust, then I know that they're likely to say, well, but this is just one account. All the rest of my accounts are okay because they're in the trust and it's a very small account. Do I know what there's a high likelihood that they're going to say something like that. If I kind of know that, and you guys kind of do, I mean, when you work with me on a case, a lot of times I'll ask you, have you considered what you're going to say if they do this? Have you considered what you're going to do if they say that? But most of the time, you guys do know most of the things that can come up. In fact, you even ask me, Jeff, what am I going to do if they say this? Or what am I going to do if they say that? So you are thinking about them. Make sure that you've practiced the topic and you've rehearsed and you know what you're going to do when the contingencies come up. They may not come up, but if they do, you're ready to go. Because being organized, being practiced, that's how you're going to be able to present with confidence. Those are the things that enable you, and then going into the meeting with a purpose. Those are the things that enable you to have a good meeting. If you don't do those things, if you don't go in with a purpose, if you don't get organized, if you don't practice and prepare for the contingencies, then you're going to call me and say, I don't know what, that didn't go well. I'm not sure why. I can guess why. You weren't organized. You didn't practice. You didn't have a purpose. But I'm not going to say if you do all those things that all of your meetings are going to magically fall into place. But I will tell you 90% of them will. There will always be those outliers that we're going to have to figure out what went wrong in spite of that. But 90% of them will go well if you do those three things. Have a purpose, organize, and practice not just the topic but the contingencies as well. 90% of your meetings will in fact fall into place if you do those three things. All right. Last topic. This one's going to seem a little strange. I want to start with a question. Now, I don't want any answers to this question. I just want you to think about it, but I want you to think about it. Seems like an offbeat question and that it shouldn't matter, but it matters. So here's the question. The question is there such a thing as a time-traveling treadmill? Is there such a thing as a time-traveling treadmill? Now, for the last part of this hour, I want to kind of share with you the implications of that question and how the answer to that question really affects everybody on the call. Even if your answer is no, there's no such thing. How your answer to that question, whether it's yes or no, does affect everybody on the call. And to see what the implications of that question are, I want to take you back in time to the flash crash of 2010. Now, we've talked about this before. So maybe if you have some answers, you might know the answer to this. We've talked about this in the past. What caused that? Any ideas? Initially, they didn't know what caused it. This was a long time ago, and now we've had the benefit of hindsight. We were able to look back, and they were able to figure out what caused it. So we get, some people are saying bad algorithms or a bad trade, kind of a bad trade. Here's what caused it. In looking back, we didn't know right away. It actually took them about 2 years to figure this out. But what caused it was this guy. That guy in the picture with the circle around his head. His name is Navinder Sarao. He caused the flash crash of 2010. So get this. He's sitting in front of his computer on the morning of May 6, 2010. He's in the bedroom of his apartment in a kind of the suburb of London. And he's downloaded this trading software that his friends have been passing around. And he and his friends have been experimenting with this software. And what it does is it allows you to put lots of orders, lots of trades in all at once. So this guy wakes up, he's in London, he's sitting in front of his computer, he's got day trading software is basically what it amounts to. And what he's going to do is he's going to spoof the market. So here's what spoofing is. So the way it works is this. You see part one. The spoofer puts in a big sell order for less than the market price. And so other people start offering to join him at that price, thinking that the price is going to go down. So he might put in an order at 45.03 for a barrel of oil. And right now it's currently at 45.05, but people seeing this huge sell order think, oh, wow, oil's going to go down. If that guy's going to sell it at 45.03, I'm going to have to sell mine at 45.03 too, or I'm going to be stuck with this giant, with all these barrels of oil. So they join him at that price. Then he cancels his phony sell order, and he immediately buys the barrels of oil at 45.03. So he just bought it for 2% a barrel less than market value. Then he turns around and puts in a huge buy order at 45.04. Well, when people see, oh, wow, 45.04, there's a lot of buyers. Other buyers join in at this price thinking, okay, well, this is a good deal. And then he cancels his buy order and sells his oil to those other people at 45.04. Now, he's manipulating the market. So he's buying it at 45.03, he's selling it at 45.04, and you think, well, he's only making a penny. But what if he's got software that allows him to make 10,000 pennies in an hour? Well, that could be a lot of money. That's not a lot of money to institutions like Fidelity or Vanguard, but it's a lot of money to a kid sitting at his computer in his apartment in a suburb of London. And so that's what he was doing. He was spoofing the market. Now again, that's fraud. That's manipulating the market. And so the SEC, they backtrack, they figure out this guy was doing that at that time. He's the one that caused that flash crash of 2010, so they extradite him to the United States and they prosecute him. his fraud. And they say, hey, look what you did. Look what you did. And he says, I didn't do that. See, his defense was, I didn't do that. Look, my friends and I had that software on our computers for months. I had been doing that for the last month. My friends had been doing it for the last month, and nothing like that happened. And not only that, it's 2 years later, and you know how many times I've done that since then? A lot. I did that a lot before. I did that a lot after. For you to say that one time that I did it on that day caused that, no, that can't be right. But it is right. I mean, it turns out that that did trigger that crash. So here's the question. Why did that particular spoofing incident cause the market to crash like that? He'd done it a lot before. He'd done it a lot since. But that one did, in fact, cause that market to react like that. Why? What was it about that particular instance that caused the market to react like that? Well, the answer, it turns out, is actually pretty complicated. The answer is in sand piles. Now, as a kid, you might remember playing in a sandbox where you'd make these sand piles. You'd take a bucket, you'd fill it with sand, you'd pour it out, and you'd watch the pile grow, but eventually it would all fall down in an avalanche and you could do it all over again. So we all have some experience with that. In 1987, there were 3 physicists that were playing the sand pile game in their lab at Brookhaven National Laboratory. Now, they were interested in what's called non-equilibrium systems, and we'll talk about those here a little bit more in a second, but really the question they were trying to answer by studying this is, what's the average size of a sand pile avalanche? Now, it doesn't seem like that would be an important question that physicists would want to spend their time on. What's the average size of a sand pile avalanche? But it has implications for things like traffic patterns. You know, have you ever been in bumper-to-bumper traffic? And you're like, there must be an accident up ahead. And you're driving frustrated because you're, in the car for 45 minutes, you've hardly moved, and then the traffic starts to move, but you never saw the accident. There was nothing, and so you're frustrated. You're like, what the? I mean, what caused that? It's a non-equilibrium system. So what they're trying to figure out, if they can answer this question, well, what causes these sand pile avalanches, and what's the average? Maybe we can figure out how to make traffic move smoother. Or viruses. Some people get sick and then it becomes an epidemic. Other times people just get sick and it's isolated to, the kids at this school. Why do some things become epidemics but other things don't? If we could figure out these non-equilibrium systems, we might be able to prevent epidemics from happening. Here's another one, earthquakes. Why are some earthquakes big and others small? And if we could figure out these non-equilibrium systems, we might be able to predict earthquakes, and we might be able to predict when there's going to be a big one versus a small one. That's why they're playing this sand pile game. And they think if they can answer 2 questions, they could unlock the answers to not having any more traffic backups, bumper to bumper, not having any more epidemics, being able to predict earthquakes and how big they'll be, and save tons of lives. So the 2 questions that are at the key to that are, how big is the average sand pile avalanche, and is there a way to predict when a sand pile avalanche is going to occur, because it seems kind of random. And it turns out that there is no average size of a sand pile avalanche, and they're impossible to predict when the avalanches are going to come. There's no way to know, even with all these computer simulations, when these avalanches are going to fall or how big they'll be. But in doing that, they did kind of figure out why it's impossible to predict. So here's what they found. To find out why such unpredictability should show up in their sand pile game, one of the physicists was named Per Bak, B-A-K, and colleagues next played a trick with their computer. Imagine peering down on the pile from above and coloring it according to its steepness. So where it's relatively flat and stable, color it green. Where it's steep and in avalanche terms ready to go, color it red. Well, when you start playing this game, what do you see? What they found at the outset is that the pile is mostly green. So when you start building these piles, you're piling flat sand on flat sand, and it's flat and it's mostly green. But as the pile grows, we start to see fingers of red. The green becomes infiltrated with red. In other words, we start to see areas of steepness where it's red and it could go at any moment. Well, with more grains, the scattering of red danger spots grows or grew until a dense skeleton of instability ran through the entire pile. Here then was a clue to its peculiar behavior. A grain falling on a red spot can, by domino-like action, cause sliding at other nearby red spots. So that's why we have an avalanche. A grain hits a red spot and it triggers an avalanche. If the red network was sparse and all the trouble spots were well isolated from the other, then a single grain could only have limited repercussions. But here's the thing. When the red spots come to riddle the pile, which is eventually what happens, the consequences of the next grain become fiendishly unpredictable. It might trigger only a few tumblings, or it might instead set off a cataclysmic chain reaction involving millions of grains of sand. The sand pile seemed to have configured itself into a hypersensitive and a peculiarly unstable condition in which the next falling grain of sand could trigger a response of any size whatsoever. So think about that for a minute. And here's why all of that matters to us. The stock market is a non-equilibrium system, like traffic, or like epidemics or viruses, or like earthquakes. And just like those other systems, take earthquakes for example, it's impossible to predict exactly when and how big the next earthquake will be. Hey, we have a huge incentive to figure that out. The best and brightest minds are working on it, and guess what they've decided? Can't be done. We don't have the kind of science it would take. In fact, what the science says is there is no science. That these things cannot be predicted. It's impossible to predict exactly when and how the big earthquake will be. We don't know. We don't know where it's going to be. We don't know how big it's going to be. We don't even know where the next one's going to be, big or small. And just like earthquakes, it's impossible to predict exactly when and how big the next stock market crash will be. We don't know. So my point is, there's no money manager or algorithm, no matter how sophisticated or complex, that can protect you from a markets crash. Just like there's no expert or computer algorithm that can predict and protect you from an earthquake. Just like there's no expert or computer algorithm that can predict and prevent a sand pile avalanche. There is no money manager or algorithm that can protect you from a market crash. And like all these other systems, like traffic or earthquakes or viruses, everything starts out fine. But as we add grains of sand, this dense skeleton of instability forms where the next grain of sand can trigger an avalanche, large or small. We don't know. There's no way to know. Remember this guy, Jeremy Grantham? We talked about him a couple of weeks ago. And what he said was, you know what? It's a fool's errand to think that any market indicators can predict a crash. Market indicators cannot predict a stock market crash. Does that mean they're useless? No. What they can do is tell you when we're getting to a point of instability. I think the analogy that we used is, imagine that I walk into a garage. Some guy's got a shed in his backyard. I walk into this shed and here's what I see. Gas cans piled high inside. He's got open paint and turpentine cans. He's got a turkey fryer in the corner with grease from last Thanksgiving still in it. And he's got a bunch of old newspapers piled inside. Now, can I tell you exactly when there's going to be an accident and that thing's going to go up in flames? No, I cannot. But I can tell you with 100% certainty that there will eventually be an accident. I mean, when I say that's an accident waiting to happen, that is the truth. That is an accident waiting to happen. But there's no way to know what's going to set off the accident or when that's going to happen. A physicist with the best algorithm in the world can't tell you that. Nobody can tell you that. All we can tell you is eventually, that's not good, dude. You better get rid of that turkey fryer and those gas cans and do something with those paint cans and that turpentine. But leaving it in this little shed altogether like that, not good. And that's what we're dealing with the stock market. The stock market is inherently, there are things that are stressors that are always constantly acting on the stock market. And it's fine until it's not, until that next grain of sand hits it. So when I say these grains of sand, what would I be talking about with the stock market? What would be a grain of sand? Well, let me just throw some things out there. Here might be one. Just out of the blue, we have to start spending billions of dollars to cover property damage caused by a big hurricane in Texas. Or forget that. Billions of dollars in property damage caused by a big hurricane in Florida. Or forget that. Billions of dollars caused by a big hurricane in both Texas and Florida. How about PE ratios out of whack? We've talked about that a lot. How about the Fed raising interest rates? We've seen that. How about the Dow breaking a milestone but not being able to hold it? Breaking 22,000 but not being able to stay above it. How about North Korea firing a missile at Guam? Or how about the U.S. tearing up a trade agreement with Mexico and Canada? How about Congress not being able to pass a tax reform bill? Or how about Congress being able to pass a tax reform bill, but people being afraid that it adds too much to the deficit? How about trade war with China? Or how about no trade war with China, just the threat of a trade war with China roiling the markets? How about failure to raise the debt ceiling? Or how about actually being able to raise the debt ceiling, but people being afraid that it increases our debt too much? How about Amazon forcing brick and mortar retail shops to close and lay off all their people? How about a kid on his computer in his London apartment putting in a bogus stock market trade request? I mean, guys, think about this. In the grand scheme of all the, and that's only a half a dozen of maybe tens of thousands of things that we could have listed. A kid on a computer in his London apartment putting in a bogus stock market request. In the grand scheme of things, where does that fall on that list? Low. But look what it caused. That's all it takes. Some 20-year-old kid messing around day trading in his apartment can cause the market. That could be the grain of sand that triggers the avalanche of all avalanches. And when it goes, it goes. Nobody's safe. Which, when you think about it, actually kind of explains something, because there are a lot of physicists on Wall Street working on these very complicated algorithms. So the question becomes, well, if these guys are so smart, why aren't they working on an algorithm that will predict the next stock market crash so that they can avoid it? Why aren't they doing that? Yeah, that's exactly right. They can't, because I'll tell you why they're not doing it, because they're physicists. Because they understand the science. They know it's impossible. The math says it's impossible. It cannot be done. Therefore, what we're going to do is work on algorithms that will exploit inefficiencies in both good and bad markets. And the way that we'll exploit them better than anybody else is we'll just be faster. So they're not working on these predictive algorithms. Instead, what they're doing is they're saying, well, let's identify the inefficiencies, and then let's see if we can be the closest to the market so that we can be the fastest and put in that trade before anybody else. That's what they're working on. algorithms to find those inefficiencies. Algorithms to find algorithms that are also trying to find those inefficiencies and fool them so that they can't get ahead of them in the trade. That's what they're working on. It's a fool's errand to work on something that's going to predict the next market crash. Cannot be done. Physicists know that. See, the only save at that point would be if somehow you could go back in time and then just get your money out the day before the market crash, which is why we started out this conversation with the question, is there such a thing as a time-traveling treadmill? And if there was, if the answer is yes, then we would want to put our money with that guy so he could go back in time and protect us from the next crash. If there's not, we better figure out something else that we can do. Now, it turns out, in an episode of The Big Bang Theory, Sheldon and Leonard have probably had the most in-depth conversation on the topic of whether or not there's such a thing as a time-traveling treadmill. It turns out that it may be that the Flash actually has one. Now, I'm not going to try and replicate their conversation, but they're debating about whether or not he would need one, because if he could actually travel at the speed of light, would he need a time-traveling treadmill? But the point is, the only guy that might even have one is that guy. And we all know that that's the world of comic books and science fiction. There's no such thing as a time-traveling treadmill. We all know that. Everybody knows that. That's why nobody's counting on that. Nobody's banking on that. Instead, there are two strategies that most experts would say you could use to kind of blunt the impact of the next big stock market crash or downturn. So here's strategy number one. It's called accident forgiveness. So here's how, have you guys seen those car commercials where the lady's saying, hey, you should work with an insurance company that has accident forgiveness. One crash, you know, most insurance companies are going to jump your rates, whereas this company has accident forgiveness. They're not going to raise your rates when you have a crash. Now, we've all seen that commercial. But people who look at things like this, the academics and guys like us, the financial advisors, we usually tell people accident forgiveness is a bad idea. Here's why. If you're a bad driver, then it would be a good idea, but guess who's excluded? Bad drivers. So teen drivers, not eligible for accident forgiveness. If you have more than one accident on your driving record, not eligible for accident forgiveness. If you've had an accident on your driving record, you're probably okay unless you've had it in the last 36 months, in which case you're not eligible for accident forgiveness. You may become eligible after 36 months has passed, but teen drivers, not eligible. Bad drivers, more than one accident, not eligible. One accident, but in the last 36 months or 3 years, not eligible. So if you're a really good driver, you're eligible, and then they just give it to you for free, right? No, it's not free. See, what they do is they say, well, okay, for accident forgiveness, we're going to go ahead and raise your rates by, say, 5 to 10%. So you're going to pay 10% more than everybody else. But hey, if you have an accident, your rates could jump 20, 30%, and that's not going to happen to you. So pay us 5 to 10% more now so that your rates won't go up later if you have an accident. That's a bad deal, because really what you're doing is prepaying for the accident. And yet there are money managers that are out there that say, hey, put your money with us and you're not going to make as much as you would make in the market. You're not going to do as well. You're not going to make as much. So prepay for the accident. Don't do as well, so that when the accident does come, you've already prepaid. You're still going to lose, but not as much, guys. That's accident forgiveness. And just like I would tell somebody who is looking at that for car insurance, don't do it. Guess what I'm going to tell people who are looking to invest? Don't do it. You're still going to lose money, just not as much, but that's fine. You prepaid your losses. You're not any better off. In fact, you may even end up being worse off depending on the market crash. If the market crashes 50%, well, you may end up being a little bit better off because you may not have prepaid that much. If the market crash only ends up being 20 or 30%, chances are you overpaid. That's one solution, I guess. Here's the other, 50-50. Have 50% of your money in the market going up as much as the market goes up, knowing that when it goes down, it's going to go down, but 50% of your money is in something that's guaranteed not to go down. That's another way to handle it, which is what most experts, academics in the field who spend their days thinking and writing about these things, recommend. And if we're experts, we will have seen that and filtered it and decided that, yes, we agree with that, or maybe we don't, but we have reasons why we don't. But guys, don't be offering accident forgiveness. For goodness sake, somebody's going to call you on that. And you're going to look like a fool. You're going to be embarrassed. Don't be embarrassed like that. Be an expert in your field. Be somebody that people knows what they're doing, and your portfolios reflect it. All right. So that's it for today. Again, Mike's out of the office, but he's back in available on Tuesday. The rest of us are here, so if you have any questions, feel free to give us a call. Otherwise, you guys have a great week, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks, guys.